Good day, everyone. Our lesson for this discussion is all about assessing learning outcomes. Okay, for our learning outcomes, at the end of the chapter, you should be able to define the following terms. Ang dami nito, no? But then again, these are very important, and this was not actually, these terms were not discussed during the basic concepts because these terms are not basic, no, and then these terms are more appropriate here. No? So we have to define the following terms: goals, objectives, and educational objectives or instructional objectives. We also have here specific or behavioral objectives, general or expressive objectives, learning outcome, learning activity, observable outcome, unobservable outcome, cognitive domain, affective domain, psychomotor domain, and the last one would be the educational taxonomy. Number two, we have to write our specific and general objectives. So we will try to define what's actually the difference between the two terms here, and we will try to come up with specific and general objectives. The next one we have is to identify learning outcomes and learning activities. Determine observable outcome and non-observable learning outcomes, because these uh, these two technical terms here, they could actually be, or we can use them in identifying if the outcome, no, can be written or not, no, because we will know later, no, kung ano yung main difference of the two. And then by the time that you will know the differences of these two terms, and dito natin malalaman kung appropriate ba siya na i-construct as a learning objective or a learning outcome per se. Number five, identify the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Please be reminded that we already have our revised Bloom's taxonomy. We will try to figure out the differences of the old and then the new, or the old and then the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, we will try to look at their differences and kung ano yung nagbago. Number six, identify the different levels of Krathwohl's 2001 revised cognitive domain. We also have here to write our specific cognitive outcomes, affective outcomes, and then of course we have to write our specific psychomotor outcomes. And I think the last learning outcome we have is write measurable and observable learning outcomes. Okay. This discussion is very important because ito yung unang kailangan ninyong i-realize when you are um, to construct your lesson plan. So much for that. Instructional goals and objectives play a very important role in both instructional process and assessment process. This serves as a guide both for teaching and learning process, communicate the purpose of instruction to other stakeholders, and to provide guidelines for assessing the performance of the students. Assessing the learning outcomes of the students is one of the very critical functions of teachers, because this is actually the time that we can say if the instruction is effective or not. No, a classroom teacher should classify the objectives of the lesson because it is very important for the selection of the teaching method and the selection of the instructional materials. Please take note that ito yung unang kailangang ma-realize ng teacher, no? The way you construct your objectives, they are very important because dito natin kukunin yung ano ba yung appropriate teaching method, and then of course your instructional materials. Okay. The objectives or the instructional materials should be appropriate for the lesson so that the teacher can motivate the students properly. No? And I think the word appropriateness when it comes to in choosing the teaching method and implementing the instructional materials, they are very important for us to really say that the effectivity, the effectivity and efficiency of the lesson. No? The objectives can be classified according to the learning outcomes to the lesson that will be discussed later. Okay, now let's try to look at the different or the purposes of instructional goals and objectives. The purposes of the instructional goals and objectives we have is, first, it provides direction for the instructional process by clarifying the intended learning outcomes. As I have been telling you, and I think it was mentioned kanina, that we really have to look at, we have to realize first the instructional goals and objectives for us to be directed when it comes to what teaching method we are to use for that particular class, what instructional materials that we are going to use. No? Number two, it conveys instructional intent to other stakeholders, such as the students, parents, school officials, and the public. I think this is very clear, no? Because since the instructional goals and objectives are very specific, they actually give you direction. Therefore, then we can say that whatever the intent, no, kung ano man yung purpose, kung ano man yung intention of that particular matter ay nakikita, no? This particular um, giving of the intent of the instruction, it is not actually limited to conveying to the students, but also to other stakeholders, no, of the school. The third one, I think the last one, is it provides basis for assessing the performance of the students by describing the performance to be measured. Again, we are trying to look at, no, the main purpose why we are gonna do here, or what are the reasons why we really have to think, and we really have to realize properly our instructional goals and objectives, because we really need to be directed, no? Directed, hindi lang limited to ano yung teaching method na gamitin, or ano yung gagamiting instructional materials, no? But also it could actually expand more to assessing the performance of the students. Now, if there is something wrong with the instructional goals or objectives, and then the processes inside, therefore we cannot assess the performance of the students well, no? Hindi pwede na yung objective mo is to add two-digit, no, numbers, for example, and then yung binigay mong assessment is nagmultiplication ka, or nagbigay ka ng different numbers of digits, no? So meaning to say, we really have to make sure that klaro yung instructional goals or objectives natin, para klaro din yung output ng lesson. Okay? If klaro yung output ng lesson, perhaps we can assess properly our students. The next one is what we call the goals and objectives. Now let's try to look at what's the difference between the two, because I think most of the time, yung mga tao, they use these terms interchangeably. No? The terms goals and objectives are two different concepts, but they are related to each other. Okay, goals and objectives are very important, most especially when you want to achieve something for the students in any classroom activities. Goals can never be accomplished without objectives, and you cannot get the objectives that you want without goals. Meaning to say, they are they have different concepts, but they are related to each other. Okay, this means that goals and objectives are both tools that you need in order that you can accomplish what you want to achieve. Now let's try to look at here a table wherein um, mentioning here or highlighting the differences between the two terms. Okay, sa goals natin, the statement is very broad compared to your objective, no? Because objective is very narrow. For your goals here, since our statement is broad, therefore then our intention is very general. But for objectives, they are very specific, therefore they are precise. And then for our goals, they are intangible. Now, why intangible? Because the intention is very general. The statement is very broad, hindi siya ganong klaro. Compared to your objectives, no? Your objectives, the statement of your objectives, they are very narrow, they are precise, most likely they're specific, therefore they are most likely tangible. And for our goals, because of the nature of your goal statement na very broad siya, therefore then, nagiging less structured siya. So, kung less structured, nagiging abstract, no? Hindi klaro. Kaya nga, if we're going to look at the other term, intangible siya. When you are to look at objectives here, they are more concrete, no? Why they are more concrete? Because they are more specific. They are tangible, therefore they're concrete. And for our goals, they cannot be validated as is, no? We, of course, it's very clear we cannot validate them as it is because they're abstract, no? They are intangible, especially the term intangible, no? We cannot validate them because they're intangible. They are very abstract. Compared to your objectives, no, since they are concrete, they are very specific, therefore it can be validated. Okay? They can be validated because it's tangible, nakikita. I am using here the term nakikita for tangible for the purpose of the discussion, but that's not actually really the definition of tangible. Next, for the goal, since our goal are they're very general, the intention is very general, the statements are broad, no? Therefore, long-term aims, what you want to accomplish, no? Kailangan talaga siya ng long-term effort, long-term na kailangan gawin for you to accomplish that because it's very general. Okay, compared to your objectives, it's very specific, therefore it requires short-term aims. Okay, and then the last one I think we have is hard to quantify for goals, no? Hard to quantify or put in a timeline. It's very clear why it is hard to quantify because most likely they're abstract. Okay, and then hard to quantify or put in a timeline because we actually have hard time in putting it into timeline because the aims are long term, correct? Okay. Compared to your objectives here, it must be given a timeline. Why? Because of the nature of the aim na very short. Okay? So must be given a timeline to accomplish and of course be more effective. Okay, so you have here your goals and objectives. Now let's try to 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 get an example. Very clear example is being a teacher. No, my goal here is for me to become a successful teacher. Okay, so my goal is for me to become someday, to become a successful teacher. That's my goal. That's actually that's my goal. Why? Because the statement is very broad. It's very general. Sir, when can we say that? When can we say that the statement is general? When can we say that the intention is very general? Or the statement is very broad. What it is, if you're going to look at here, you can actually chop off the statement. No, how you ask yourself how to become a successful teacher. So again, let's go back to our example. No, I want to be a successful teacher. So my goal is to become a successful teacher. Okay. Uh, when can we say or bali ano yung hint natin na yung statement is a goal or the statement is broad, meron siyang general intention. If that particular statement can be chopped off or pwede mo pa siyang maging ma-narrow down. So for you to say or to tell, no, ibig sabihin, um, paano ba ako magiging successful na teacher? Okay. If you can ask that to and then chop it off, mean to say the statement is very broad. Okay? So, how to become a successful teacher? Of course, my objective, no? Kung hindi ka magiging teacher, no? Hindi ka magiging successful na teacher kung hindi ka mag-enroll sa teacher na kurso. No? For example, sa teaching course. So, meaning, for you to go to college muna, you have to, of course, graduate ng high school. No? For our case now, for the K-12 program, you have to go first basic education and then, of course, pass through senior high school. That is your objective. Okay, for example, my first objective is for me to graduate senior high school. Okay, that's your first objective. Now, that's your first objective for that certain goal, to become a successful teacher. And then the next objective, if we're going to look at my statement, the statement is very precise and very tangible. Okay. Another is I want my objective now is to go to a prestigious university. Okay, that's another goal for that for the objective. Another objective for that goal, not to become a successful teacher. And then, of course, I have to pass my subjects. No? And then I have to graduate the teaching education course. Okay. That's another objective for that goal. And then right after that, I have to review for the board exam. Okay, and then right after I have to take the exam, I have to pass the exam, and then I have to apply, no, ma-apply ka sa DepEd, okay? And then of course, uh, kailangan kong magpursige, no? If ever nakapasok ka na ng job, of course, your next objective to become a successful teacher is, of course, to do your part, no? To attend seminars and workshops, no? To go to schooling, to enroll myself to a master's degree, enroll myself to PhD, for example, blah, 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 to become a successful teacher. Okay, now you go back to that example. Please take note that the statement you can actually have one goal, but you can have as much as 10 or more than 10 objectives for you to achieve your goal. Okay, as you can see here, without the other, you cannot do that particular thing. Okay, your goals actually hindi siya, of course, your goals will not be cannot be will not be there without your objectives. Okay, your objectives cannot be, of course, cannot be realized without the goal. Okay, now again, try to look at the statements and then compare them. No, and then you can see there that the goal statement is very broad, meron siyang general intention. It's very intangible, no? Because intangible and of course very abstract. Why? Very abstract kasi nga, you don't know how to become a successful teacher. Okay? But for you to become a successful teacher, you have to do those objectives, specific statements. Okay? So that is your goals and objectives. I hope that is clear for you all. Next is the term goal. We also have general program objectives. We have instructional objectives, and what are again the differences of these terms. When we say goals, goals they are a broad statement of very general educational outcomes that do not include specific level of performance. Please take note, everybody, that your objectives, your aims, your goals. No, for example, in the context of MSU main campus, whatever the goals and objectives of the different colleges, they're actually anchored to the MSU vision, mission, objectives, no, of the university. Again, okay. So dyan siya naka-anchor because we really have to make sure that meron tayong tinatawag na vertically alignment, no? And then dapat din cohesive, bali, no? Mayroong tinatawag na cohesive na property yung objectives at saka yung goals natin, okay? Dapat structured siya. Okay? So again, for goals, they're a broad statement of a very general educational outcomes that do not include specific level of performance. Okay? It tend to change infrequently and in response to the societal pressure. Example, learn problem solving skills, develop high level thinking skills, appreciate the beauty of an art, no, be creative and be competent in the basic skills in the area of grammar. Okay, they tend to change infrequently. No, if there will be changes, of course, that is because of the response to societal pressure. No, meaning to say, when we say societal pressure, the societal needs. Okay, that's very very common concept naman kasi kung ano yung needs ng society, therefore there the educational institution should also conform. Next is the term general educational program objectives. More narrowly defined statements of educational outcomes that apply to specific educational programs. So this is now the time that the MSU vision, mission, objectives, whatsoever of the university, they are narrowed down to the different uh, educational program objectives. No, for the engineering, iba yung program objectives nila. But then again, if we're going to look at that, is very uh, co co hindi siya coherent, no? What I mean, coherent, yung cohesiveness, coherent to the MSU vision, mission, objectives, and any statements of the university. Okay, but then again, they're more specific to the educational programs. The educational programs that I am saying here, perhaps, ay yung field of specialization. We can have that as an example. Again, we're talking here the university context, the MSU main context. Next, formulated on the annual basis. Okay, ito annual basis kasi nga they could be formulated. It's not just because of the societal pressure, but because this is really a need, no, for us to revise it. No, so pwede siya. And developed by program coordinators, principals, and other school administrators. So it can be formulated on the annual basis. Okay. Next, I think the last we have is the instructional objectives. Instructional objectives, they are a specific statement of the learner's behavior or outcomes that are expected to be exhibited by the students after completing a unit of instruction. So, yung ibig sabihin ng instructional objectives, like for example, isang lesson. Okay, so specific statement of the learner's behaviors or outcomes that are expected na makita ng estudyante at the end of a unit or an instruction. So kung ang topic natin ngayon is photosynthesis, and then one of my instructional objectives is for you to define photosynthesis, therefore then that is an example of an instructional objective. Okay? Specific statement of the learner's behavior na dapat ma-exhibit ng estudyante at the end of the instruction or the unit or a unit. Okay? So that is instructional objective. Another one, unit of instruction may mean, okay, ibig sabihin ng unit of instruction may mean a 2-week lesson plan on polynomials, for example, a 1 week lesson on parallelism after correlatives, sorry, that is grammar, no? 1 class period on katangian ng wika. Okay, so we can have it at the end of the lesson. The student should be able to add fractions with 100% accuracy, or the student should be able to dissect the frog following the correct procedures. Okay, so that is our instructional objectives. Take note and please read again the statements. If you're going to look at, they are specific. No, they are specific in such a manner that it conveys kung ano yung expected na dapat ma-exhibit ng estudyante after completing a unit of instruction. Okay? I think nakita na natin yung differences ng goal, educational program objectives, and instructional objectives. Now let's try to look at this example. Okay. So for this example, no, meron tayo for goal. Example for goal. Tingnan ko muna. Okay. Goal, no? Example, to develop highly skilled, competent, and globally competitive teachers and educational leaders. That is the goal of the college, no? Okay. Goal of the College of Education. Okay. Now let's try to look at here the general objectives. The College of Education is committed to attain the following objectives. Ito yung mga objectives ni College of Education. Next is the typical problems encountered when writing objectives. We have here a table, no, with 3 columns. The first column we have is the problems, no? And then the second one error types, and then solutions, no, to the problem stated. So first one, too broad or complex. So yung error types natin would be the objective is too broad in scope or is actually more than one objective. So we have to make sure that our objective here is very specific. And then since it is specific, it should have only one objective. No, hindi pwedeng the end of the lesson, the student should be able to discuss and enumerate and discuss. So you cannot do that. Okay? It should be specific. So kung specific siya, dapat isa lang talaga yung dapat niyang i-focus na objective for that item. Okay? And then of course, solutions, we have to simplify or break apart. If you have here, enumerate the factors affecting, okay? And then the other one, discuss each factor affecting photosynthesis, for example. Okay. Next problem we have is false or missing behavior, condition or degree. Okay. Later on, meron tayong makikitang solution for this particular problem and then the pattern of how we do it. No? So the objective does not list the correct behavior, condition, and or degree, or it is missing. Okay. So for here, for the solution, we have to be more specific and make sure that the behavior, the condition, and then the degree are included in the statement. Okay. Next is false given. So for false given, describes instruction, not conditions. Okay. So baka iba yung statement. Anyway, makikita naman yan. Okay. By the time you will be constructing it, I think meron tayong examples later. And then, of course, the solution for that is we have to simplify the statement, and then we have to include only the ABCDs. Now, we will know later kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng ABCDs. And then false performance, no true overt observable listed. No? For example, meron tayong sinulat doon na um, to know the to know the concept of solution. Okay, the term know there is not actually observable. It's actually quite difficult, and then we can say that it is a false performance. Okay, nagiging false performance siya kasi hindi mo siya pwedeng you cannot actually measure it, and you cannot execute it. No, ano yung ibig sabihin niya ng to know? Okay, because the term is very broad. Next, the solution, we have to describe what behavior you must observe. Okay, so that is why we really have to be specific. Okay, and then simplify, of course. Okay, so those are the typical problems encountered when writing objectives. Now, to avoid different problems encountered in writing your objectives, we will be discussing here the components of instructional objectives and other terms related to constructing a good instructional objective. Okay. So here are the four main things that objectives should specify. So ito na yung sinasabi nating ABCD kanina. Okay. So your letter A is for audience. For B here is your behavior or observable behavior. Ginamitan talaga na siyang word na observable because since dapat measurable, tangible talaga siya. Okay. So I think let's try to look at some example. No? For audience, who are the specific people of the objectives are aimed at. So, kanino siya sa mga estudyante, for example. Observable behavior, what? Okay. What do you expect them to be able to do? No? To define, to list no, the factors affecting solubility, mga ganyan. Okay? There should be an overt observable behavior even if the actual behavior is covert or mental in nature. Okay. If you cannot see it, hear it, touch it, or smell it, you cannot be sure your audience really learned it. No? It should be tangible. So ito yung ibig sabihin talaga ng part na ito. No? So the bottom line here is all about tangibility. Tangible. Okay. Next we have is the special conditions. So that is your letter C, no? Condition. The behavior must be displayed by the students. So that is our special condition. So it should be displayed by the students and not by any other people. How? Under what circumstances will the learning occur? And what will the student be given or already be expected to know to accomplish the learning? So ito yung mga conditions. Ano yung mga gagawin ng mga estudyante? No? Ano yung dapat nilang gawin? Okay? Number 4, the stating criterion level or the degree for letter D. Okay? The criterion level of acceptable performance specifies how many of the items must the students answer correctly for the teacher to attain his or her objectives. No? So how much? And then must a specific set of criteria be met? And then do you want total mastery, which is 100%? Do you want them to respond correctly 90% of the time, among others? Okay. So yan yung tinatawag natin na criterion level or yung degree. Okay, so that is our ABCD. Now again, the purpose of identifying these four main things now when you are writing your objectives is for you to be guided now and to make sure that those problems stated kanina hindi natin ma-encounter. Okay, or ma-minimize man siguro natin. Okay, so that is our fourth one, the letter D, stating criterion level or degree. Always remember that the criterion level need not to be specified in percentage of the number of items correctly answered. Okay? It can be stated as number of items correct, basta kay meron talaga siyang degree, no? Number of consecutive items correct, or essential features included in the case of essay, question, or paper. Completion within a specified time or completion with a certain degree of accuracy. Okay? At the end, okay, meron tayong example. So ito yung statement natin, this is our objective na statement with the use of ABCD format. Okay? The first one, given a specific case study, that is what we call condition. Okay. The student, sino yung gagawa? The student, therefore they are the audience. Okay. So the student will be able to successfully here is what we call the degree. No? Ito yung sinabi ko kanina that the criterion level need not be specified in percentage. So pwedeng iba. Basta kaya meron talaga siyang degree. Okay. The student will be able to successfully conduct needs analysis. So the needs analysis there is the behavior. Okay. So ano yung dapat nilang gawin? Okay. Given a specific case study that is a condition, the student will be able to successfully conduct needs analysis. Okay, so that is A, B, C, D. Take note of the format. Okay, next we have is what we call the types of educational objectives. We have here specific or behavioral objectives. So educational objectives is also known as instructional objectives. Please take note that your educational objective is also known as instructional objective. There are two types of educational objectives. The first one is specific or behavioral objectives. Okay. Now let's try to look at here specific or behavioral objectives. According to here, it is a precise statement of behavior to be exhibited by the students. Precise statement, not precise, specific. So the criterion by which mastery of the objectives will be judged. And okay, and the statement of the conditions under which behavior must be demonstrated. Example, multiply three-digit numbers with 95% accuracy. Take note that that is a precise statement of behavior to be exhibited by the students. And take note, the criterion by which mastery of the objectives will be judged, the criterion which mastery of the objectives, 95%. And then yung condition, okay, multiply three-digit numbers under which behavior must be demonstrated. Another example, list the months of the year in proper order with 100% accuracy. The last example I think we have is to encode 30 words per minute with at most 3 errors using computer. So that is our specific or behavioral objectives. Now we go to the general or expressive objectives. A statement wherein the behaviors are not usually specified and the criterion of the performance level is not stated. So it only describes the experience or educational activity to be done. The outcome of the activity is not expressed in specific terms but in general terms such as understand or interpret and then of course analyze. Okay. Please take note those terms are very general, no? Because if you are going to look at understand, ang dami pa pwede. It's either how can you say if the student understand or naka-understand, for example, yung estudyante, of course, perhaps pwede kang magpa-discuss. Okay, see, that is why if we're going to look at understand here, understand is an example of a general term. Okay, examples, interpret the novel, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Interpret, very general. Okay. Visit Manila Zoo and discuss what was of interest. And for, I think this is the last example, understand the concept of normal distribution. Okay. These examples specify only the activity or experience and broad educational outcome. Kung ano lang ginawa, kung ano yung gagawin. Okay, they're not specific at all. Okay, instructional objectives. Instructional objective is a clear and concise statement of skill or skills that students are expected to perform or exhibit after discussing a certain lesson or unit of instruction. Okay. So the components of instructional objectives are observable behaviors. Okay, we have special conditions, which the behavior must be exhibited and performance level considered sufficient to demonstrate mastery. Take note and go back to the example. Okay. When a teacher developed instructional objectives, he or she must include an action verb that specifies learning outcomes. Kaya, kung manotice ninyo, always talaga tayo gumagamit ng action verb. Okay? that specifies learning outcomes. Okay, next. Okay, so when we say learning outcome, so when a teacher develops instructional objectives, remember he must include an action verb that specifies their outcomes. So some educators and education students are often confused with learning outcome and learning activity. Okay, but according to the definition, an activity that implies a certain product or an end result of instructional objectives is what we call learning outcome. No? Result siya na tinatawag nating instructional objectives. We call it learning outcome. Klaro naman sa word, no? Outcome. Okay. If you write instructional objectives as a means or a process of attaining the end product, okay, it is considered as learning activity. Okay. Hence, revise it so that the product of the activity is stated. So, ang learning activity natin, if you write instructional objectives as a means for or process of attaining the end product, we call it learning activity. So it's not a learning outcome anymore. Okay. Now, let's try to look at this table and try to figure out kung ano yung kaibahan ng learning activities and learning outcomes. So learning activities, no, a very broad study. Okay. But for the learning outcomes, identify perhaps. Okay. Okay. You have to read for you to write. Okay. It's a learning activity. You have to watch for you to recall. No? And then you have to listen first before you can list something. Now, try to look at the learning activities. They are general, no? Most likely, they're general, and then learning outcomes. It's very specific. Okay. So, this is the things that you are to do for you to do this also. Okay. Next is the types of learning outcomes. After developing learning outcomes, the next step the teacher must consider is to identify whether the learning outcomes is stated as a measurable and observable behavior. Again, that's our concern, no? Dapat, aside from specific siya, it should be measurable and of course, observable behavior. The following are examples of verbs in terms of observable learning outcomes and unobservable learning outcomes. Okay. Now, if you are to look at again, meron naman tayong pwede magamit na word, no? You can actually describe this. They are very broad, very, very general. Okay. Sorry. Erase na lang natin. Okay. They are very general. But for the observable learning outcomes, they are much more specific. Okay. So, sabi ko nga kanina, the non-observable learning outcome, understand. To understand the concept of photosynthesis. Now, paano ba natin malalaman kung naka-understand ba yung estudyante or wala? Okay. So that is why we have to use an observable learning outcome to draw. Okay. Or to discuss, perhaps you can do that. Okay. Next is the term appreciate. No? To appreciate the beauty of nature. Charing. Okay. So for you to appreciate, you have to of course build. Okay, that's observable learning outcome. Take note, this is observable, no? List is observable. When you are reciting, that is of course very observable, no? Compared to valuing and knowing. Okay. Okay. And then add, pwede. And of course, be familiar for here. So you can say that the major characteristic ng observable learning outcomes, they're specific. Pwede. Okay. And this one, they're very broad. Pwede pa natin ma-chop-chop. Okay. I think the presentation in the table is very clear, no? If we are to look at the difference between observable learning outcomes and non-observable learning outcomes. Again, you have to go back to that table na for you really to understand what's the difference between the two. I think it's very clear naman sa example natin sa naka-table. Okay, let's proceed and try to look at the examples of observable learning outcomes. I think we have 5 examples. Okay, number 1, recite the names of the characters in the story Misery by Anton Shishov. Okay, the recite here is very specific, no? And then perhaps if you are to think of an observable learning outcomes, I think that is understand, no? Okay. So for you, how can we say na naintindihan talaga ng estudyante yung story, no, ng Misery? Okay, para mas maklaro, of course we have to make sure na maka-recite sila sa names ng characters. Okay, or to know, for example, kung hindi naman understand, so kung no, very general, no. Okay. Number 2 we have is add 2-digit numbers with 100% accuracy. I think this one is hindi naman siya debatable, no? Klarong-klaro. You have here add 2-digit numbers and then of course meron pa tayong degree 100% accuracy. Okay. Number 3, circle the initial sounds of words. Change the battery of an engine. And the last example we have is list the steps of hypothesis testing in order. Okay. I think also those examples are very clear. If you have questions, of course, our GC is open 24/7, no, for your queries. Now let's try to look at the examples of non-observable learning outcomes for us to differentiate the examples. Number 1, be familiar with the constitutional provisions relevant to agrarian reforms. That's very general. Um, Sir, bakit po always na general yung term na ginagamit niyo for non-observable learning outcomes? Because a general statement of outcome, they have, of course, a feature or characteristic, no, sa mga general learning outcomes that they are non-observable. Why they are non-observable? Because they are so abstract. They are very broad. No, we cannot identify. We have to specify, simplify the statement for us to for the statement to be observable, no? And then klaro. This one is not clear. No? Although nagiging klaro naman, of course, na naiintindihan yun natin yung statement, but ano yung gustong ipabatid ng particular statement, no? Again, our goal here dapat measurable siya and then observable learning outcome. Number 2, understand the process of evaporation. Again, we can still use other terms, no, for us to really say na that they understand the process of evaporation. Okay. Another example, enjoy speaking Spanish. Yeah, number 3 is very clear, no? That is a non-observable learning outcome. Number 4, appreciate the beauty of an art. And I think number 5, know the concept of normal distribution. Okay. Now let's jump off to the different types of learning outcomes to consider. Below are the lists of learning outcomes classified as a learning objective. There are merely suggestive as categories to be considered. This is according to Grunlund, Lin, and Miller, 2009. So for knowledge, kung sa knowledge na level, of course, we have terminologies, we have specific facts. No, for example, ang birthday ni Rizal, so that is actually a specific fact. No, concepts and principles, that is still knowledge. Methods and procedures, if we're going to list the different methods and procedures, that is still knowledge. Now, concepts and principles can also be part of understanding. It depends on how you construct the item. No? And methods and procedures also, written materials, like for example, graphs, maps, because most probably, ang pinapagawa kasi natin sa graphs, maps, and numerical data, we are to interpret it or discuss kung ano yung nasa graphs or maps, and that is understanding. And then of course, problem situations. Next, application, factual information, still concepts and principles, methods and procedures, they are part of application na nakadepende kung paano siya na nakakonstruct. And then problem solving skills, no? You are doing computations, that is part of application. Appreciations, no? The term appreciations, you can dig in, no? You can actually dig dig it up more for literature, art, music, social and scientific achievements. And then for attitudes, you have social attitudes and of course scientific attitudes. For critical thinking skills naman, focusing on the critical thinking and scientific thinking. For general skills, we have laboratory, we have performance skills, communication skills, computational skills, and social skills. So those are the list of learning outcomes classified as learning objective. Again, if you have a different reference, no, meron kayong other references with, of course, different authors aside from these people here, most likely you can observe differences also sa kanilang categories. But for Grondon, Lin, and Miller, these are their categories. Anyway, again, these are just merely suggestive. Very redundant, no? They are merely suggestive as categories to be considered. Okay. Anyway, so far for that, no? Um, I think we are to jump off to the taxonomy of educational objectives. Okay, we have the last one. We have appreciations and interests and appreciations, and of course adjustments. Okay. As mentioned, the term taxonomy of educational objectives. Taxonomy of educational objectives is a useful guide for developing a comprehensive list of instructional objectives. Again, instructional objectives is also known as educational objectives. Okay. A taxonomy is primarily useful in identifying the types of learning outcomes that should be considered when developing a comprehensive list of objectives for classroom instruction. The term taxonomy here is not a branch of biology, no, that deals with classifications of organisms, no, or naming organisms, but here we are to identify the learning outcomes based on the nature of the classroom instruction. Okay. According to Benjamin Bloom, 1940, as cited by Gabuyu 2011, a well-known psychologist and an educator took the initiative to lead in formulating and classifying the goals and objectives of the educational processes. This is actually to give us the different levels of objectives and justice to the different levels of classroom instruction. We really have to categorize them now. Okay, so there are three domains of educational activities were determined by Benjamin Bloom. Now, the first one is the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domain. We are actually focusing and emphasizing this because at the end of the day, we really wanted to mold our students holistically, no, not just in just specific angle of the child, but the whole um, entity, no, angles of each child. The first one we have is a cognitive domain, also called for outcomes of mental activity, such as memorizing, we have reading, we also have problem solving, we have analyzing, and synthesizing and drawing conclusions. That is all about the mental activity that is cognitive. Uh, okay. Affective domain naman, it describes learning objectives that emphasize a feeling tone. We also have an emotion or a degree of acceptance or rejection. So it is actually more on emotions, no affective domain. Okay. So affective objectives vary from simple to a simple attention to selected a phenomena to complex but internally consistent qualities of character and conscience. So nakadepende daw siya sa level. But then again, it actually more consistent to internal qualities and character, no, of a person. Okay. So nakadepende lang sa level. No? Like for example, my judgment, we all have judgments, no? But then again, the level of judgment, the level of conscience, we do have that. Okay. So we found a large number of such objectives in the literature, expressed as interests, attitudes, and appreciations, values, and emotional sets or biases. This is according to Krathwohl et al. 1964, as cited by Ismani 2011. So most likely, we can look and appreciate affective domain to literatures, no? Because sa literatures kasi or sa literature, ang pinapairal doon ay emotions because you are trying to um, what do you call it, visualize the meaning, no, of the piece, no. It refers to the person's awareness and internalization of objects and simulations. It focuses on the emotions of the learners. Okay. So that's why affective domain is more on feelings and emotions. Okay. The last domain we have is the psychomotor domain, and this is characterized by the progressive levels of behaviors from observation to mastery of skills, according to Simpson 1972, as cited by Ismani 2011. So this includes physical movement. We also have here coordination and use of the motor skills areas. Again, for cognitive, we have the mental activity, capacity, whatever. For affective domain, it's more on the feelings and emotions. For psychomotor naman, it's more on the motor skill areas. Development of these skills requires practice and is measured in terms of speed, precision, distance, procedures, okay, or techniques and execution. It focused on the physical and kinesthetic skills of the learner. This domain is characterized by the progressive levels of behaviors from, again, observation to mastery of physical skills. So from observation thing, and then by the time you can execute it to master of physical skills. So Bloom and other educators work on cognitive domain, established and completed the hierarchy of educational objectives in 1956. It was called the Bloom's Taxonomy of the Cognitive Domain. Okay, the affective and psychomotor domains were also developed by other group of educators. Okay, now let's try to look at some of the examples or samples of educational objectives and learning outcomes in Araling Panlipunan. Now, this is in the K to 12 curriculum. So, sa educational objectives natin, pagbibigay sa mga mag-aaral ng kaalaman at pangunawa tungkol sa tao, kapaligiran at lipunan. This is cognitive, no? Kay pagbibigay sa mga mag-aaral ng kaalaman at pangunawa. Okay. By the way, there are verbs that you may encounter sa cognitive, sa affective, or perhaps sa psychomotor, but then again, you are confused because that is for example, that sample is categorized as cognitive objective. Nakadepende kasi yan on how the statement is being constructed. No? That is why you really have to understand the objective for you to identify if it is really cognitive, affective, or psychomotor. For the learning outcomes naman, if as you notice here sa objectives natin, from our learning objectives, we created different learning outcomes. No? So, nailalarawan ang sariling buhay simula sa pagsilang hanggang sa kasalukuyang edad. Okay, and then nasasabi at napapaliwanag ang mga alituntunin sa silid-aralan at sa paaralan. At saka naisa-isa ang mga tungkulin ng isang mabuting mamamayan sa pangangalaga ng kapaligiran. Okay, that is for educational objectives and learning outcomes. Now, if we are going to look at here again, it's not actually the nature of the educational objectives is not more on general, ha? Okay, so coming from this statement na humugot tayo ng different learning objectives, but as you can see, the learning objectives are still coherent to the educational objective of this particular subject. I think we also have another example, paglinang ng kakayahan na magsagawa ng proyektong pantahanan at pampamayanan. So this is psychomotor objective because we are to try to look at the ability, no, to execute, no, project. If you're to look at here, pag sinasabing project, it requires on the mental capacity or activity, no? But then again, ang ginagawa kasi dito, they have to execute. Therefore, this is psychomotor objective. Okay. So coming from that educational objectives, we constructed different learning outcomes. Example, nakakasulat ng sanaysay na naglalarawan ng mga taong bumubuo ng sariling pamilya. Okay. Nakapagsasagawa ng panayam sa ilang mahalagang pinuno ng sariling barangay at naisusulat ang mga nakalap na kaalaman. Okay. So that is for learning objectives, learning outcomes. We cannot do this in just a snap of our finger. So that is why you have to go back to the statement and look at the differences of these statements. Okay. Another example coming from Araling Panlipunan, paganyak sa mga mag-aaral upang maipamalas ang malalim na pagpapahalaga sa kapaligiran. Of course, paganyak, this is more on feelings, emotions, affective, objective. Okay. Coming from that, we constructed learning outcomes na kasusulat ng tula, awit o maikling kwento tungkol sa kahalagan ng kapaligiran, and then nakagagawa ng video presentation tungkol sa wastong pag-aalaga ng kapaligiran. Okay. Okay. So that's it for the educational objectives and learning outcomes for Araling Panlipunan. So Bloom's and other educators work on cognitive domain established and completed the hierarchy of educational objectives in 1956, no? And it was called as the Bloom's Taxonomy of the cognitive domain. So, yung gumawa ng psychomotor at saka affective domain, ibang grupo naman yun. Here are the criteria for you to select your appropriate objectives. I think we have four. First one is the objectives should include all important outcomes of the course or subject matter. Like, for example, if the lesson is all about discussing the concept of photosynthesis, therefore the objective should focus on discussing the concept of photosynthesis and make sure that the objectives could generalize, no, the whole thing, the discussing photosynthesis. The second one is the objective should be in harmony with the content standards of the state and with the general goals of the school. That is why I've been telling you that whatever the educational programs, the educational objectives of the college, and then the specific program, no? Kung ano yung objectives or goals ng College of Education, ng Department of Secondary Teaching, ng BS in Biology, ng BS in Filipino, BS in English, and so on and so forth, they they are actually anchored to the goals of the university. Okay. Number three, the objective should be in harmony with the sound principles of learning. Of course, um, our curriculum, no, for example, even in the basic education, if we're going to look at and check the K to 12 curriculum framework, there are a lot of educational theories and principles stated there. And then um, for us kasi, no, for us really to make sure that our curriculum is valid, our curriculum is well founded. For example, if that's the right term, we have to have some basis. No, we have legal basis. For example, for the state, for the Philippines, that the educational system is based on legal basis, no? Laws, for example. At the same time, our in the level of university, especially in the College of Education, we're also anchoring to the different principles of learning, no, mga theories of learning. Okay. Number four, the last one, the objectives should be realistic in terms of the abilities of the students, time, and the available facilities. That is true. No, we make sure that the objectives are tangible. We make sure, aside from the objectives are specific, we have to make sure that the objectives are tangible, they are realistic, and of course, it conform to the abilities of the students. We don't create objectives that is beyond to the abilities of the students. Like for example, if ang mga estudyante ay grade 1 and then your objective is to calculate or to simplify the equation on for example, to simplify the trigonometric functions. Di ba grade 1, no? Mabuang ang mga estudyante, no? That is why we have to level the objectives to the abilities of the students. And of course, we have to make sure the time, no? Time bounded dapat yung objective natin. Perhaps it should be clear na this particular objective or this particular discussion is good for a minute, good for 60 minutes, good for a week or whatever. Okay, and of course available facilities. Therefore, I'm talking about the different instructional materials that you are to incorporate, no, for this objective to be successfully implemented. Okay, next we have is try to look at the different clear statement of instructional objectives. So to obtain a clear statement of instructional objectives, you should define the objectives in two steps. The first one is state the general objectives of instruction as intended learning outcomes. You state the general objective. The second one, list under each objective a sample of the specific types of performance that the student should be able to demonstrate when they have achieved the objective. Again, this is according to Grunlund 2000 as cited by the Grunlund, Lin, and Miller 2009. So again, we have to first, for us really to have a clear statement of instructional objectives, you have first to state the general objectives, and right after that, no, you consider the general objectives as intended learning outcomes, and after that, you have to specify. Now, coming from the general objectives, coming from the general statements, how good ka dun, and then you will create your specific types or objectives, no, the list of objectives specifying the type of performance that you wanted your students to exhibit or to perform. Okay. Now let's try to look at this example. So this procedure should result in the statement of general objectives and your specific learning outcomes. Now, for here, let's have an example. Understands the scientific principles. So the number one here is what we call the general objective. Ibig sabihin natin, this is your general objective, no? And this considers the intended learning outcomes. Now, the 1.1 to 1.6, we call it the specific objectives na. Okay? Okay. So, and specific learning outcomes. So coming from the word understand, hugo tayo. How can we specify the word understanding na mas klaro siya, no? Na ma-exhibit talaga ng estudyante. Of course, we have to describe. By describing the principle in their own words, we can say that the students really understands the scientific principles. Now, by identifying examples of the principle, perhaps we can say that they understand, the scientific principles. By stating reasonable hypothesis based on the given principles, of course, we can say that the students really understand the scientific principles and so on. Okay, try to look at here. We have the word understands, and this is a general term. And then we created the specific type of objectives. No? So from understanding through describing, identifying, stating, and then so on. Okay, I hope that is clear to you. So in this example, the expected learning outcome is concerned with the understanding of the students regarding scientific principles, correct? So as the verb understands is expressed as general objective, the statement immediately starts with the word understands. Okay. So it is very important to start immediately with the verb so that it will focus only on the intended outcomes, not in other words, no? Kasi baka meron pa tayong mga flowery or auxiliary words before we use the verb understand. So automatically we have to use first the verb, no? So, para focus and then directed tayo. Okay. So no need to add phrase such as the student should be able to demonstrate that they understand. So wala ng mga flowery words and the like. Okay. Another example is understands the parts and functions of animals and importance to humans that is very broad. No, we have here term understands, and we also have here the term understanding the importance of humans. And this is very general. So by doing it, of course, nandito na tayo. We have describe, we have identify. Okay. Perhaps you can write here an introductory statement. Siguro at the end of the lesson, basta kay next understands the parts. Okay. I hope that is clear to you. Another example for physics, understands the motion of objects. Okay. Another example, no, describe yung ginamit niya. Dito identify things. You also have describe the movements and so on. Okay. Next, let's try to look at how to match and then testing it, how to match the test items to instructional objectives. Dito, ang goal naman natin dito is we have to make sure that the test items or the assessment that the teacher or you are actually working on is of course matched to the instructional objectives given. No? So when constructing test items, always remember that they should match the instructional objectives. No, your instructional objectives is to add two-digit numbers, and then yung assessment mo is all about adding three-digit numbers. Okay, diba? It's very confusing, and by that, no, by doing that, we cannot assess the performance of the students if they really get your your instructional objective. Okay. The learning outcomes and the learning conditions specified in the test items should match with the learning outcomes and conditions stated in the objectives. If a test developer follow the basic rule, this is actually basic, no? Then the test is ensured to have content validity. Okay, so this is not the concept of content validity, no. The content validity is very important so that you can measure what you want to measure from the students, the concept of validity. Always remember that your goal is to assess the achievement of the students. Therefore, hence, don't ask tricky questions. This is also a rule of thumb in constructing your test items. I think right after this chapter, we will be discussing, um, if I'm going to check it first. Yeah, you have to develop classroom assessment tools, and it's a rule of thumb for us that we really we discourage constructing questions that are very tricky, no? Because the main purpose why we are constructing our test because we wanted to assess the performance or the achievement of the students. To measure the achievement of the students, ask them to demonstrate a mastery of skills, no? That was specified in the conditions and the instructional objectives. Consider the following examples of matching test items to instructional objectives as the author adapted and modified Akabizin and Burrich 2007 instructional objectives. So from the table, items 1 and 3 have learning outcomes that match with the test items 2, 4, and 5 have learning outcomes that were unmatched with the test items. Now, again, para mas klaro yung sinabi ko, let's try to look at item number 1. The objective is to discriminate fact from opinion from President Duterte's first State of the Nation address. So discriminate fact from opinion. Now the test item is all about from the State of the Nation address speech of President Duterte, give 5 examples of facts and 5 examples of uh, opinions, and this is actually matched, correct? No, so we are to discriminate facts from opinion, and then the test item is all about giving examples of statements that are facts and statements that are opinions coming from the speech of President Duterte. Therefore, this item is a match. Number 2, objective, recall the names and capitals. Recall the names and capitals of all different provinces of regions 1 and 2 in the Philippines. And then yung test item, list the names and capitals of 2 provinces in region 1 and 3 provinces in region 3. Please take note, our focus is regions 1 and 2, but sa test item natin, we are focusing on region 1 and sorry, different provinces pala, no? And then, ang kinuha dito, we have to list the names of capital of 2 provinces and 3 provinces in region 2. And then, ang objective, we have to recall the names and capitals of all different provinces. Okay. Is this match? Of course, it's not a match. No? It's not a match. Number 3, recall the names and capitals of all different. Okay. Number 3, objective is to list the main event in chronological order. After reading the short story A Vendetta, okay, uh, list the main event in chronological order. That is our objective. The test item is from the short story A Vendetta, list the main event in chronological order. Klarong-klaro, no? That the objective and the test item is match. Next, number 4, our objective for number 4 is to circle the nouns and pronouns from the given list of words test item is to give 5 examples of pronouns and 5 examples of verbs. This is very clear that your objective on test item is not, of course, no match. Okay. Number 5, our objective is to make a freehand drawing, no freehand drawing about region 2 using your map as a guide. And then the test item is without using your map. Yan palang condition na yan, no? That makes your objective and test item a no match. Okay. Because our objective is for you to make a freehand drawing about region 2 using your map as your guide. Na pagdating ng test item without using your map na nakalagay. Okay? Again, we have to understand the objective, and by that you can identify if the test item is appropriate or match for that objective. Okay. I hope that is clear. Okay. Right after that, of course, I did mention about these the Bloom's taxonomy. No? But before we proceed to the concept of the revised taxonomy, let's try to look at first the different types of objectives. Okay. Number one, let's go back. No, I think this is just a review. No, number one, educational objectives. So stretch from objectives for specific curriculum areas, often subjects of programs. No, so at certain grade levels to specific outcomes of classroom instruction. I think for educational objectives, klaro naman yan, nakikita niyo sa K-12 curriculum guide. Meron tayong different educational objectives sa iba't ibang level ng sa iba't ibang grade level, no? So according to Brown and Green, instructional objectives should clearly indicate some observable or quantifiable student behavior. Bakit naging some? Because most likely your educational objectives they are broad, no? Posner and Rodnitsky call instructional objectives intended learning outcomes. I think that it is actually followed, no? So which they define as statement of precisely what the student is to learn. Example, which facts, concepts, and techniques. Next is the behavioral objectives. Students can show that they have acquired particular skills or knowledge. So according to Maker, objectives must describe the behavior that will indicate the learner has achieved the objective, the condition or situation imposed on the learner when he or she demonstrates achievement, and the third one is the minimum proficiency level that will be acceptable. I think this is very clear when you are to use the ABCD format, no? Or the other format na list in chronological order perfectly, mga ganyan-ganyan. Okay. So, yung mga examples natin kanina, you could actually categorize them if it is part of educational objective or behavioral objectives. Next, as I have mentioned, we'll be discussing the Bloom's revised taxonomy, and let's try to trace lang kung ano yung nagbago, no, sa ating old and then the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Lauren Anderson, a former student of Bloom, together with Krathwold, revised the Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive domain in the mid-90s in order to fit the more outcome-focused modern education objectives. Okay. There are two major changes. The first one, the names in the 6 categories from noun to active verb. So, noun yung ginamit natin, knowledge, comprehension, application, nagiging active verb na siya. Okay, na meron ng ing na nakalagay, no? The arrangement of the order of the last 2 highest levels. Again, I think we have a picture maput now. Okay. This is now the changes sa Bloom's taxonomy. So before, noun yung ginamit natin. We have knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. For the 2001, no, to the revised Bloom's taxonomy, we actually revised the term in such a manner na magiging active verb siya. That is why we are using here the ing form. Remembering, so aside from twisting the term, no? So instead of knowledge, we use remembering. Instead of comprehension, we use understanding, applying, analyzing, and of course, yung isa din sa mga klarong na nabago ay ito. Okay? Our synthesis is actually changed to creating. evaluation is changed to evaluating. And then sa revised Bloom's taxonomy natin, na pinagpalit yung level, no? The highest level for the old version is evaluation. But for the revised Bloom's taxonomy, the highest level is creating, no? Because according to them, by the time where you are actually working, mura na siyang authenticity at the same time, it's beyond evaluating, no? It is because sa creating, parang sakop lahat. When you are creating something, you are actually doing these things. Okay, below. Okay. This one is, of course, you're very familiar with the term LUTs and HUTs. The LUTs, they are the lower order thinking skills, and then HUTs, they're higher order thinking skills. And accordingly, no, sa Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the cognitive domain, their intellect, knowledge, think by Benjamin Bloom. Okay. Uh, and if we're going to stick to the technicalities, no, I think meron yun sa DepEd order kung ilang porsyento lang yung HOTS na kailangan for basic ed. No, nakadepende pa elementary pa yan or high school. Okay? But for some reasons, yung mga special science na mga school, like for example, the Philippine Science High School system, they are more on HOTS. Therefore, kahit grade 7 pa lang sila, nasa high school pa lang, most likely 70% talaga yung HOTS nila compared to LUTs. Okay. For basic ed naman, nakadepende yan sa grade, of course, if it's elementary again and then high school. But for tertiary, most likely kailangan talaga natin ng maraming HOTS, no, higher order thinking skills, because of the mental ability and capacity of the tertiary level students natin. So it should, dapat talaga marami tayong HOTS banda. Okay. Sige. Please take note that your knowledge, comprehension, application is part of lower order thinking skills, and most of the students were thinking, no, that problem solving or solving problem is part of HOTS. No, well, in fact, it's not. No, when you are solving problems on what you call this speed, velocity, and acceleration, they are not part of higher order thinking skills. They are part of the lower order thinking skills, no, specifically application. Okay, so this is now the revised Bloom's taxonomy, lower order thinking skills. Wala pa rin nagbago, no? Still applying part pa rin siya ng lower order thinking skills. The first three, LUTs, no? Then the next three is part of the HUTs. Okay, so you just have to read, no, the description, because again, it's this familiarization, internalization of the Bloom's taxonomy with their description. We cannot just do this in just one session. No, you really have to read, reread, and then of course you have to understand it. Okay. Next is the psychomotor base. This particular arrangement is based on Simpson. Okay, so according to him, yung pinakamababang level is the perception or awareness. Please be reminded that your psychomotor domain. This is from no, yung lowest level is actually more on awareness, no? And then the highest one is doon na parang execution. Okay? So coming from perception awareness and then setting, a guided response, a mechanism, we have here the complex of response, adaptation, and origination. Okay. Next, we have a psychomotor based on Dave. This one is meron ng imitation sa kanya, but if mind you that when you imitate, you are to observe. And meaning to say you're aware. Okay, so still imitation is the lowest part here. Naturalization, this is now the execution based on originality, psychomotor. Okay. Psychomotor based on Harrow, reflex movements. Of course, you cannot do this without being aware, no, or you cannot not being what do you call this imitate. Okay, so this is still part of awareness, most like an imitation, and the highest one is the non-discursive communication. Next psychomotor, this is the mixed one or combined. I do not know. Parang ito yung parang ginagamit talaga natin. Okay. So this is from observing to adapting. I think this is I love this one compared to the previous pyramids, no. Ang dami nila. Ito parang makapagsan ito this is nice because most likely there are parts there na masum up na. Okay. And then of course we have here the psychomotor domain, physical or skills and do. You just have to look at the behavior descriptions, okay? And then their examples, and of course, the very important one, their keywords. Ito yung gagamitin natin when you are to construct your learning objectives. Okay. At the end of this session, the student should be able to copy, okay, to follow, somewhat like that. Okay. Next is affective domain. I think this is the only one. I don't know if I think we still have other, no. But affective domain we actually have from Kraftwolf, no. Receiving. Okay, this is being also aware naman. Okay, and then of course characterization. Okay, internalizing is not the highest point, but it's more on characterization. Okay, because right after internalizing, you characterize. Parang ginamit mo talaga siya. Okay, so here is the affective domain and the third level. Okay. Again, yung importante lang naman dito ay itong keywords. But of course, we can use the keywords appropriately when we are to internalize the description of each level. And that's the end of discussion. Okay. Thank you so much. No, if you have questions, I think no, if you have questions naman, uh, especially for some other parts here when it comes to constructing um, the learning objectives, you have to go back na lang naman sa example. And then you will see there. No? Kasi if I'm just going to explain it, hindi nyo talaga siya makikita agad. No? You really have to see it for yourself and then you compare things and that's the time that you will see the pattern. Okay? So thank you so much. God bless everyone. Keep safe always.